today. We're going to go over the monthly new feature summary to start off the call. And then we're going to be diving into workspace architecture. So it's been a question that I've personally been getting quite a bit in my day-to-day work. So I wanted to talk about and share what I've learned and some best practices in the creation of workspaces to better manage your Power BI content. After, we'll have Jared Brown talking about shared data sets and composite models. So he'll be going over kind of to supplement the workspace architecture discussion we have to discuss the use of shared data sets and a very exciting feature in not just the Power BI space, but the data space in general, our composite models. So the ability to blend data across multiple sources. So to start off, one thing we usually do in these pug groups is just give some brief intros. So feel free to, speak up and introduce yourself. Mention the company or industry you're a part of, a recent BI challenge or BI trend, and then what you want to get out of this user group. So I'll kick us off. My name is Casey Philcox. I'm a lead consultant with Talon. My recent BI challenge or observed BI trend is definitely, what I'm going to present today, which is workspace management. What I've been seeing kind of in some of my own projects is kind of the creation of these workspaces without any real, plan moving forward of how they're going to organize content, how they're going to source control their content, and all of this stuff that, if you don't create your workspaces up front correctly, you're going to have issues down the line. What do I want to get out of this user group? As always, I like coming to hear other, problems that you all have on the call around Power BI, and I like hearing and learning from them. So any thing that gets brought up, I think is worthwhile here. So, all right. Anybody else want to give an intro?
I'll jump in. My name's Mark Paradise. I just kind of found this this group on the slide, and I was in a pug group or pug a while ago in kind of New York, New Jersey area, and saw there was a Hartford one, so I decided to join in and see what it's all out.
Nice. Nice to meet you, Mark.
Nice to meet you too.
Anybody else out there?
I can go, Casey. My name is Michael Thomas. I am the chief data scientist at a company called Catchbrook Analytics, which is a data science consulting firm based out of the Hartford, Connecticut area. We work with Tallan, as Casey knows, unfortunately, well. One of my, I guess, recent challenges that I've been seeing myself do a lot of is translating code back and forth between different languages. So translating code from one language to another, whether that be SQL to DAX in Power BI, or Access to SQL, or SAS to Python, or all sorts of stuff like that. But always fun, always tricky. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, my name is Sajid, and I am from Toronto, working with BMO, Bank of Montreal. So I work as a database developer, Oracle database developer. So I closely work with data day in and day out. So just want to explore how the recent challenges with BI and try to explore Power BI in my upcoming project, because they are trying to bring up new tools along with Power BI like Tableau and the other tools. So just want to compare and see which one is best for the project. So that's the reason I thought of connecting with you guys and then try to understand the challenges. So hope this gives me a lot of knowledge and then implement them. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, great to have you. And you mentioned you're from Toronto. Is that what?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, these virtual pugs are always great to get people from all over. So great to have you.
Yeah. Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
All right, this is Jared, VP of Data and Analytics at Talon. And you originally created this user group to kind of raise awareness about what Power BI was, get people kind of familiar with the capabilities. But I will say recently, the volume of inquiries we're getting about data projects in general and specifically Power BI governance adoption best practices have been incredible. So now I think we've shifted into a mode where it's not just about education about the product, but kind of advancing the capabilities into some of the more enterprise governance and adoption options, as Casey was alluding. So kind of really exciting. I know these types of user groups are picking up all over the country, as we'll see. So encourage folks to check out a couple, and as Casey I think is going to talk about next, we're always looking for people to volunteer. And we did have a volunteer who was going to present today. Unfortunately, he's not available, and we've kind of shifted gears last minute on the topic. But I think the plan is to have him do his presentation the next meeting. So certainly stay tuned for when that is at the end.
Awesome. Anybody else want to say hello?
Yeah, I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Cheek. I work at Fordham University in New York, and I got first introduced to Power BI. Our ITSM wasn't strong enough in terms of reporting, so I looked into connecting the ticketing database through Power BI, and after that, it was just a whole new world that just opened up for me. So I did a couple of training, attended training, I should say. And one of my biggest challenges right now is import versus direct query, and because we have a large set of data, and I'm having the hardest time working through it. So I'm getting there, though.
Nice. Well, great to have you, Omar. And yeah, import and first learning about the connection types, import, direct query, and live connection too, which some of our presentations will directly kind of focus on. It's always a tricky hurdle, and when to use which one too. So if you're trying to unlock those huge data sets, then you got to go to direct query. But if there's opportunities for creating a semantic layer within your Power BI model, and import's going to be their way to go. So we'll be happy to talk about some of those throughout these groups.
Yeah, or both, right? Because you can do them both together. So.
Yeah.
And then since that's a kind of an interesting segue, you had direct query import and live connection. Now they've released Enterprise Composite Models, which kind of combines direct query and live connection. So that's one of the topics today. We're going to do that demo at the end. So hopefully that doesn't add more confusion to the different options, but some pretty powerful capabilities.
Awesome. So any last minute hellos? Otherwise, we can move on to our presentations.
I just want to say something from the Talon team. I think now that we have a member or someone attending from Toronto, we can call this the Hartford International Power BI User Group, and that just kicks us up a notch. So welcome,
nice.
Everyone.
Oh, wow.
All right. So yeah, just a little bit of user group business. Just so you know what we're all about. We are meeting every other month, so we've been pretty good at keeping that schedule. So if you ever want to tune in, just look back for us every other month. For leadership roles, overall, again, as Jared mentioned, if you have any interest in presenting a topic, or maybe presenting a problem even in which we could work as a group to maybe solve, that would be something fun. We're ultimately looking for volunteers or people to contribute content to the user group. So if you have any interest in any of that, definitely reach out to us, and we'd be happy to get you involved. Also, if you want to sponsor the user group, if you want to have your organization come in and show a demonstration, that's more than oops, sorry about that. That's something our Power BI user group does as well. So So some of the mechanisms or vehicles in which you can find out about us, we have a meetup that gets sent out, and we also are the best way to find out about each user group is the Power BI user group website. So pbiusergroup.com. You could subscribe to the Hartford Power BI user group. We have some discussion posts up there where if you just want to, pose a question, if you have something that's been on your mind, you can make a post there. And this group, as well as some other Power BI user group members, can stumble upon that and potentially answer a question. But overall, the best way to kind of learn about when we're meeting next is on the user group site. All right. So if there's not any questions on logistics, we can move into our feature presentation. And this is actually a little out of order. Apologize. So what we're gonna change gears here. We're gonna have Graham from Talon present the monthly new feature summary. So Graham, you wanna?
Yeah, sure thing. So hey everyone. Before I get started, I would just like to say, let me open up my camera there. I would just like to say I'm wearing a coat right now because the heat in my apartment was turned off today, so I'm actually freezing. So if I start like shivering during this presentation, it's because I'm actually cold. I'm not just incredibly excited. So let me take over the screen. So what I'll be talking about to start us off here is the new features introduced to Power BI in December. Normally during these user groups, I talk about the latest 2 months, but Microsoft has said that they're not releasing updates for January. I think that's actually what they've done in the past. So we only have 1 month to talk about here, so it'll be a relatively short list. Although it is rather short here, there are some pretty big things that I want to go over. And the full list is a little bit longer than this. I've kind of trimmed out some of the less meaningful stuff. They always do a whole bunch of updates to the type of connectors they have and the visuals that they kind of push towards users from their marketplace. So those are all there if you go to the blog. But what I have here is just the most interesting and relevant stuff from December's updates. So without further ado, let's jump into the first section here, which is their reporting updates. And the first update they have here is, in my opinion, the biggest one on the entire list. This is actually huge. They have enabled direct query from a Power BI dataset and Azure Analysis Services. So in the past, if you've ever tried to connect to a Power BI dataset, whether that's a report that you've published and you want to use that same dataset, or whether that is like a usage metric report, the only way to connect would be a live connection. And the limitation of a live connection is that you can't modify the dataset at all. What you have is what you get. You can't add new sources to it. You can't change anything about it. With a direct query, you can continue to build on that data set once you've brought it in. And I do have a quick demo that I'm going to get into right after this that shows that you can now query a Power BI dataset as well as an Excel file, a SQL, another Power BI dataset, really whatever you want. And that really opens the doors on what you can do with datasets that you publish to the service. The next point here under reporting is a preview feature that they're calling small multiples. Not a very descriptive name, but what this is essentially a new way to categorize data in a few types of visuals. I believe the visuals that this is available in is a bar chart, column chart, line chart, and maybe an area plot. And this is also part of the small demo that I'll give after this. But to explain it a little bit, it's rather than trying to categorize something on a single visual, it splits your visual into a number of smaller visuals or smaller multiple visuals. So that's the small multiples update. Again, that's in preview, along with the first update that I mentioned. Both of these are in preview, so they're not going to be available when you open up Power BI for the first time. But if you go into the options and go into preview features, both of those will be available on a checklist for you to enable and begin to experience. The third update is the final preview feature that they've updated this month, and this is data protection sensitivity labels in Power BI Desktop. So what this means is just like you can in Excel, you can now put a sensitivity label on your PBIX file, your Power BI report, and you can categorize your report as having a certain level of sensitivity. The cool thing about Power BI is that when you publish this to the service, both the data set and the report that you publish will inherit those sensitivity labels. So you can pretty much guarantee that when you put these sensitivity labels on your PBIX file, that data is always going to be protected under that label once it's in the service. Next thing on the list is the increased rectangle select data point limit. So one thing that we've talked about in previous months, and they've kind of had this theme of going back and adding more onto, is their rectangle select data point feature. So what that is a number of supported visuals, and that list just keeps growing. Eventually, I think they want every visual to support this. Allow you to hold control and create a box over your visual, and everything within that box would be selected. There was a limitation previously where if you had a huge number of data points, it would only select up to a certain amount. They have greatly increased the limit on those data points. So just kind of a small improvement there, but good to keep in mind. And the last note under reporting is the selection pane is now available in the mobile layout view. So if you haven't seen the selection pane before in Power BI, it's just another pane that you can bring right up next to your fields list or your filters list. It's a pane of all of the visuals on the page, whether or not they are visible. And you can also use that with like a bookmarks page or bookmarks pane to control, if a user clicks a button, which visuals are then visible and which are not visible. But the update is simply that this pane is now available to mobile users. So not a huge update, just a nice thing to have if you're going to be using a mobile phone. Moving into the next section here under data preparation. There were a number of changes, and they actually don't have an explicit list of these changes. They just have the word many on the Power BI blog. So over the course of February, they added many changes. And I actually experienced this working closely with data flows in that time. It seemed like every other day that you go in to use data flows, something small had changed about it, and they're kind of continuing to do that. So while I don't have a complete list of the changes that they've made, I think once data flows has reached a point that they're happy with it being in a final form, if you will, they will probably release a full, a larger documentation of what's available there. But I guess this just kind of lets us know that it's constantly underway and undergoing improvement. And then moving into our last section here in the Power BI service, most of these are going to be tenant level settings. So the first one here is a new tenant setting was added for providing a custom publish message to your users. So now as an admin of Power BI, you can go in and make it so that within your organization, when a user clicks publish, instead of seeing the default pop-up, would you like to publish this report, you can have your own custom message there. A number of new export settings were also made available in the Power BI tenant settings. And I don't have the full list on these. I think 5 new ones were added for a total of something like 8 options. But if you are an admin, you can go in there and it's pretty clear what they've added. There's a long list now of different ways to export your Power BI reports that you can either choose to enable or disable. But some of these would include like as a PDF, as a HTML, stuff like that. You can just export your PBIX files in different ways. The Power BI Premium per User public preview is now available. This is, again, a tenant level setting. But what this would allow for is if you are a admin of your organization, you can allow all of your users to try premium for free for a certain amount of time. After that time expires, obviously you would have to purchase premium in order to continue experiencing the benefits that you get from it. But this is just kind of a preview that they're making available to organizations. And then the last point here is a rather interesting one. The ability to, or the feature to quickly create reports in the service without needing Power BI Desktop. This is not yet out, but they did mention it, that it's in the works and should be coming soon. They didn't give too many specifics on this, but the one thing that they said they wanted to be possible was to drag in a web page into Power BI service, have it automatically create a report for you with the data on that web page without you having to move around the fields or really do any work. I'm always a little bit wary of when they try to do something like this, because without limiting or without enabling you to have the interactivity that you would, I'm not sure of its usefulness. But we'll have to wait and see on that. It could be a really cool feature that they add. Again, it's not yet out, but I'm sure that when that is available, we will be made aware, and I'll probably be making a demo for it in the near future. So that's it on the kind of big updates for December. Do we have any questions on any of those notes before I jump into a quick demo?
I have a question about the Power BI Premium per user.
Sure.
I don't know if you know much more about that. But that's kind of where we have a premium capacity that we bought purely for licensing of sharing stuff, right? And I'm using it heavily as an administrator for the data flows, the computer data flows. But we're being pressed to pull back on some of the premium spending because it's expensive as well. And the thought being that is that we could have only a couple people, right, like administrators myself, who are using it for data flows, bring us back down to premium, and they're possibly moving to an E5 licensing, which would give us all pro licenses, right, the whole entire company pro licenses, and then we would get rid of the premium capacity. It kind of scares me to get rid of that because I rely on it so heavily for a lot of things. But is that kind of a model they're going forward instead of using it just for like licensing and sharing them more of the actual features itself of premium?
Yeah, I think what they're trying to do here is just give the organization a taste of what you can do in premium, and then kind of let them know, hey, this is something that you could find very useful. See if it is useful, and if it is, go ahead and purchase it. I don't think it can really be applied to your situation. Like, I wouldn't recommend implementing this to continue experiencing premium, because at the end of your preview, you'd have to, upgrade again. But I think their goal here is just to encourage organizations to get deeper into Power BI.
Yeah, and one other thing to add there is the premium per user price point is obviously a lot lower. So it kind of filled the gap for some of those like middle to small size companies who wanted some of the premium features, but couldn't afford or didn't need the capacity that the full premium node had. And your data flow challenge that requires premium, we should check, because there's a couple tricks you may be able to do to not require premium for the data flow. But it's a long shot, but it's probably worth a quick conversation.
Hey, good evening, guys. It's Sid from Atlanta. One of my friend, Matt Felgate, kind of forwarded me this request today, and happy to join this call. I just have a question on the data flow, and we're actually working for the Connecticut client, Eversource Energy, and it's like I haven't seen anywhere from like 17 years experience of this. The data set is like each of the tables holds like 400 columns plus ERP application, and the volume of data in these tables are like 10 million, 15 million, and for when you try to connect these data sets using a data flow, I like kind of wonder, or like I go to this. What about we run out of space on the premium, because when you have large data flows, is there like a chance or good to use a data flow because we have millions of rows? Do we have a size limit that when do we want to use the data flow? That's my question.
I think I'll give that question to Jared or Casey. I don't think I have enough experience with data flows to have a guideline of the size that you'd want there.
Yeah, that is a good question. I'll have to take a look myself and see what the size limits are on the data flow. I mean, there's some scenarios where the data flow can actually be backed by your own data lake, which in theory, is effectively, near limitless. But what's possible for the data flow to process in a kind of reasonable amount of time might be a better question. But yeah, let me take a little deeper look and get back to you on that, Sid. And if, I mean, Casey, unless you had any specific info there.
Yeah, I'll just add an added point to that, just an extended conversation. One of our job extracts 750 megabytes of file into data flow, and it takes 45 minutes to load it. And when we talk to our data guys, data architecture, he explains me, hey, said if you're running a job in 4 o'clock when the ETL starts loading all those tables, and you're using all the pool space in the database, and you're holding up for 45 minutes, like too much.
Yeah, let's find a time to follow up, because you might, with that volume of data, it might make sense to look at that technique where you're writing data directly to the data lake and linking your data flow to it, so you don't even necessarily need Power BI compute to use it. But yeah, I mean that's interesting. But there's there's a couple options to consider there.
Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of my input on the data flow, I think I'm in the same boat with Jared. I'm unsure if there's what the limitation on the Power BI is there, but I think he's on the right track in terms of maybe getting that data in a separate ADLS account outside of what Power BI has. So yeah, we can definitely explore that for you, Sid. And as we move into the demo, for the sake of time, Graham, I know Jared has the direct query and demo. So if you want to skip over that one, Jared has that for later. So
Sure.
Okay.
And I assume you can't hear me? Can you
Oh,
hear me?
there. Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, we hear.
Oh, thank you. Sid, I'm going to send you a note. I represent the Enterprise Analytic Platform at Eversource, and we do exactly what these gentlemen have just been describing. So I think you and I should talk. That's all I want to say. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Put my hand down.
Oh, great. Glad we can bring you guys together.
Yeah, had to come to this meeting to meet Sid.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll just really quickly go through a few of the kind of big points from the new feature summary in a demo, and then we'll pass it back over to Casey. So yeah, the first thing, I was going to go into a little bit more detail here, but we can see based on the new model view within Power BI that these are coming from different data sources, and one of those data sources is a direct query to a Power BI data source. You can also see the storage mode is mixed. So, that's really cool. We can mix and match those data sources. But as I think Jared will be talking about that more later, I'll kind of breeze over that and talk about the small multiples. So in the past, there has been two ways to categorize data with two categorical axes on bar and column charts. So those ways are using the legend column in a clustered column chart or in a stacked column chart. So we have two categorical axes here. We have our product, and then we have the country in which the sale occurs. Right. So makes sense. There's those two ways to kind of add two categorical axes. But now, if we were to drag this country from the legend to the small multiples field, we can see that there's kind of this new option to show our data. And we can, it will create for us a number of new visuals. It's still under the same visual. There's still only one box around it. But there are now 5 different visuals here, which is going to show our data for each of those country categories. And you can also customize this small multiple title. It's not what I'm looking for. So yeah, you can customize this to show like 3 per row, 4 per row, whatever you want, so that this will fit into your space. But it's a good thing to keep in mind if you're trying to represent 2 categorical axes on your bar column chart. This is an option that you now have available to you. And the second thing, just really quickly, I wanted to talk about, this is just a scatter plot that's filled with a bunch of data. If we do hold Control and try to drag across, normally before this month, if I had tried this, it would only select a certain number of these points because there's so many of them. But now it will actually select all of them. I think I actually have to start on the visual. Let's find out. Yeah. So now all of these are selected. You can see that they are selected because our chart is being highlighted over here, and the dots off to the side are a slightly lighter color. But everything within that box was selected, even though there were several hundred data points there. So that's going to wrap it up for quick demo. As I said, this month was relatively light on content, but hopefully this sparks some ideas for you, or at least keeps you up to date on what's going on with Power BI. That's going to wrap it up for my section, though, so I will turn this back over to Casey. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, Graham. Anybody have any questions on any of the new features? All right. So we're now going to be moving on to a topic that I mentioned is kind of a question for a lot of organizations right now. So I thought I'd kind of share some of my experiences and my ideas with workspace management. And hopefully this will serve as a good kind of precursor to a more advanced topic of shared data sets and composite models that Jared has planned shortly after this. So to start off, just a quick intro on what is a Power BI workspace. So a Power BI workspace contains Power BI content. So this can be your data sets, your dashboards, your data flows, your Excel workbooks. Essentially, it is your collaborative space for development and sharing. So the image that you see on this slide is a Power BI workspace, and at the it has a name, Financial Reporting. And within this workspace, you can see we have a few different artifacts. We have a balance sheet report, an executive dashboard, a finance data set, and then there's also a financial reporting report. So again, a workspace is just a collection of Power BI artifacts in which you can begin to collaborate with your colleagues. Now, if you are a Power BI report designer, if you're actually curating content, creating reports, potentially creating data sets, typically the best practice is to not share that content with end users within the context of a workspace, but rather publish it to what is referred to as a Power BI app. And a Power BI app is a content type that simply wraps up all of the Power BI content into an easy to use content type called this app, in which you can customize the navigation, and all the people that are going to consume this content need to do is navigate to the app. They don't need to worry about navigating the Power BI service. Sometimes I know I had a little bit of a learning curve when I first started using the service. You have to know the navigation on the left hand side to go to the workspace. Then you have to go to the content of the workspace and then find your content. The app makes it simple. So if you have your finalized reports and you want to share that with the management, the best way to do that is within a Power BI app. So understanding of this kind of process of workspace and then publishing to an app is kind of crucial to this workspace architecture that I'm going to propose. Now, another kind of precursor to all of these conversations is making the distinction between the classic and the quote unquote new workspace. So the classic workspace is actually being deprecated by Microsoft. If you've ever done any reporting on your workspaces, they're referred to as group workspaces. And the reason why, and when I say group workspace, if you were to access, if you're leveraging the Power BI REST API, the results that you actually get back, it labels these workspaces as groups. And the reason these workspaces are backed by a Microsoft 365 group. When you create a classic workspace, you're actually creating a Microsoft 365 group behind the scenes. These classic workspaces only have members and admins, so two roles. I mentioned Microsoft is in the process of deprecating these moving forward. They've already put in some plans you'll see throughout the service where you can block creation of classic workspaces in favor of the new default workspace type. So this is the preferred workspace type moving forward. One of the things it does not create the Microsoft 365 group on creation in favor of more granular roles, in which Jared will talk about in depth. These roles include admin, member, contributor, and viewer. So you can assign Azure Active Directory group to these roles, but in order to kind of succeed in these best practices of workspace management, you definitely need this default or new version 2 workspace to enable these different roles. And we'll talk about what each of them can do a little bit. Some other features you get with the default workspace experience is you get a contact list, so you can actually define who to contact for workspace related needs. And then also, oops. Am I still on the call?
Yep, you're still
You
here.
are, but your presentation's gone.
I apologize. It just closed.
Just go from memory.
Give me 1 second. All right, so as I am going to go from memory. So the other thing that workspaces kind of enable is the use of shared data sets. So this concept of shared data sets is kind of going to be crucial within this proposed architecture that, of workspace organization and management. It's going to allow us, my PowerPoint just closed again.
It must be that new information protection enhancement, right? It's all the sensitive information that I want you to share.
Yeah. All right, one more try here. Open it in my browser. Apologize, everyone. All right, I don't have too many slides, so here we go. All right, yeah, so the use of shared data sets, in order to leverage this feature, which is going to be crucial to kind of this proposed architecture, you need to be using a default workspace experience. So, in summary, I have taken my own stance on classic versus default workspaces. Moving forward, I would encourage organizations to turn off or block the creation of classic workspaces, as they don't have the features to uphold kind of best practices that are being quickly established throughout the Power BI space. Ultimately, they will be deprecated at some point in time. So wanted to throw this little tidbit out there. Now, when you're creating a workspace, it's very important to understand the type of content that is going to be present within that workspace. So I've gone ahead and, with the help of my team, developed these workspace types. And you could probably find some similarities to what we've defined here online, but I want to say that these are types that my team has come up with. So I like separating workspaces into 3 separate types. The first being a provision subject area. So most oftentimes you have a project or a certain reporting need, and the IT team is going to come together. They're going to create a dev, test, and production version of these workspaces, and they're going to create a workspace per one report category and curate content for end users. So, these are the IT folks. They're going to get a request for a project. They're going to create reports. They're going to have all the nice features that Power BI offers because they know the product in and out. And they're ultimately going to create an app at the end of it all. So they're going to develop within the context of this workspace, within a project, and eventually they're going to work it through a dev, test, and production workspace. And they're ultimately going to publish it to an app. And I have some visuals to hopefully clear up some of the questions you have on this kind of design. Another workspace type is a self-service workspace. So the self-service workspace is going to be an area where you have one per department, whether it be finance, supply chain, human resources. It's essentially an area where they can go, and it's a collaborative environment for them to create their own reports. So ideally, they're going to leverage a data set that's already there for them, and they could create ad hoc reports and create reports as needed. So they differ, as in, one is kind of these corporate reports in which have, requirements and kind of go through a process of development. And then you have self-service in which, it's really a playground for exploration. And then finally, one of the main topics of today is a shared data set workspace. And ultimately, this is going to be a workspace that only holds or contains data sets or data flows. And essentially what this allows you to do is you can have data modelers focus on the data sets and think of it as like a deli menu where you can actually pick and choose the data sets you want and begin sharing them across workspaces. So, it's like a shopping cart, or I'm trying to think of the best metaphor here, but ultimately all these the self-service workspaces or even the provision subject area workspaces can kind of pick and choose data sets, certified data sets potentially to report off of. So let's take a look at what this may look like. So here are those provision subject area workspaces. So let's say, the finance team came to us and they said, hey, I need some financial reporting. What we would do is we would provision 3 workspaces for them, a development, a test, and a production. And ultimately, you can move your content from development to test with proper connection strings. And finally, that final workspace in which when it's all tested and vetted out in kind of this pre-prod workspace environment, you can then deploy to an app and have all of your end users kind of leverage that app. But what this does is it allows you to kind of, again, craft that content for them, make sure your connection strings are appropriate across the workspaces, and it also gives you that that ability to kind of test changes as you move things forward through environments. So again, if another project comes along, in this case we have supply chain, you're going to spin up another 3 workspaces. So you may be thinking that this is a lot of overhead, but there's features that are already available with premium, such as deployment pipelines, that are going to make the automation of this a little bit easier. So if you're interested in kind of that development, test, and production lifecycle, deployment pipelines are probably of great interest for you, but this design can be used without the deployment pipelines as well. It's just there's a little bit more overhead, but this is kind of a recommended good practice, I'll say, for your Power BI content. So again, these workspaces are going to be managed by typically IT. So what happens for the workspaces in which your management or CEO needs to create their own ad hoc reports? You need to begin considering shared data set workspaces. So this is, again, IT is going to manage a certified data set workspace where you create content, that single version of the truth potentially, in which you publish data sets to this workspace. It's going to have similar dev, test, and production workspaces. And eventually, this is going to be your shopping cart for data sets to kind of share with other workspaces. So now, again, your shared data sets. So this is kind of what it would look like. Your shared data sets will kind of drive some of these other workspaces potentially. But also, here's where those self-service workspaces come from. Your end users that are creating ad hoc reports, they don't want to sometimes have anything to do with the data modeling. So rather than have them be concerned with that, IT can simply serve them up a data set, leveraging the shared data set workspace. They can reference it in their department-specific reporting workspace, and they can begin building their own reports and their dashboards. And if they are a little tech savvy, they can create their own data sets as well within the context of that workspace. So this is kind of going to be the shared data sets is going to be kind of the theme of the rest of the presentation here. So, this idea, again, is just kind of abstracting your data sets in their own centralized location in which they could begin to be shared with other workspaces. So just some other questions, if this workspace management kind of resonates with you and you're looking to kind of establish this at your own organization, here are some questions that always pop up within the conversation of, who's going to be doing the work. So, who will be creating the workspaces? If you're going to, follow this pattern, you have to have a process in which someone is going to be creating these workspaces. How will they be requested, whether it be a ServiceNow ticket, an IT help desk, things of that nature. And then what is the process? So if you're going to have your dev, test, and production, and you don't have premium, you need to come up with that process of how these are originally going to be provisioned. If you have premium capacity, you need to kind of give some attention to what workspaces are going to get premium and which ones are not. You're paying for hardware here, so you want to be kind of careful and meticulous on what content really and truly needs premium features. Another question that comes up is, should My Workspace be used? If you have a Power BI Pro account, you've seen My Workspace. There's a lot of depending on your organization, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with My Workspace. If people start pushing content there and they begin sharing it, then they leave the company. I've had organizations come and say, we don't want My Workspace being used. You can't turn it off, but you can, set policies to say, if you need content, request it through our ServiceNow process, and we'll create a self-service reporting area for you. So just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, who administers and monitors the workspace. So just a few questions that personally I've had to answer in kind of striving for this workspace management architecture I kind of proposed. So the reason why we want to present this is just because I think it's a good segue into the shared data sets conversation. So I want to make sure, Jared, you have a good chunk of time to present. So are there any questions on this management style of workspaces? And if not, we'll jump into shared data sets and see how you can actually begin sharing content with other workspaces. All right.
All right. I'll go ahead and start presenting. All right, so I know one of the topics that we plan to cover is the Enterprise Composite Models, but as you'll see, there's quite a bit of overlap between concepts like shared data sets and workspace permissions. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time covering a number of these topics. So I'll go ahead and jump right in. All right, 1 second. Everybody can see my screen, I assume. So the topics that I'm going to cover today are the workspace and dataset basics. I mean, Casey covered quite a bit of those, so I'll go through that fairly quickly. We'll move into the concept of shared data sets and actually a couple demos for those. Some of the implications, too, for workspace and dataset security, some things that you may not be aware of, limitations, a couple different approaches. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but it is an important thing to consider. Some of the deployment considerations, I know we were talking a little bit about deployment pipelines. There's a couple scenarios where those are or aren't possible, and a few other considerations as well. And then we'll finish with the Enterprise Composite Model conversation, which, as Graham had mentioned earlier, is also called direct query against Power BI data sets and Azure Analysis Services models, which is kind of an unfortunately long name. They had to come up with something a little bit better. Okay, so in terms of the workspace basics, kind of Casey described this concept of a contained workspace where you have, as you can see here, a couple different sources that were used to create a data set. And then there's a a report associated with it, and then perhaps a dashboard. People may have seen this in the past where when you're building your report in Power BI Desktop, you save the PBIX file. It's called published report. Well, what do? You get a data set called published report and a report called published report. So a little bit misleading, but it's very typical. And again, to kind of reiterate, you're not limited to one data set and report per workspace. You can have multiple, of course, and just illustrating here that the concepts of dashboards, you can have different visuals from different reports on the same dashboard. So kind of the idea of the dashboard in the Power BI services gives you that kind of single pane of glass for a variety of different visuals. Okay, so now I'm going to actually do a quick demo on creating reports from an existing data set, because we have this one report per one data set pattern going here, but one of the things that we want to be able to do is create multiple reports for a single data set. Okay, and the couple different ways to do that. And let me go ahead and bring up my screen here. Just got to remember which one it is. Oh, not that one. There we go. Okay, so the three different categories are the ability to just create a report from the Power BI service. There's this feature called save a copy of an existing report, or there's Power BI Desktop, which most people are probably familiar with. So really quickly, to kind of run through a scenario here, I'm just going to pick one of these reports that just happens to be out in this workspace I'm in right now. And if you wanted to create a brand new report, and you have a data set out here already, you have the option right here to create a report. And much like Power BI Desktop, you have all the same capabilities that you have. If I want to show my sales data by some kind of geography, let's go by country, a couple clicks, and you have your report. I can then go ahead and save this, and notice this is going to save in that same workspace I was in. So there it is. Now I have a second report off of this one data set. There's a couple new ways to do the same thing. There's this feature here in the upper left where you could say new report, and you say I want to pick a published data set, and I could go in and find that same data set I was just using, which was, I should have picked one that I was expecting. I think it was this one. Same exact experience, right? So I would go through, save this, and that same report would appear here off of that diet final report. There is this feature over on the left, and kind of as Graham alluded, they're starting to make more and more capabilities available here. Notice they have, paste or manually enter data as an option now, but I can do the same exact thing. And when I go and this is going to be a little bit, this is going to be relevant in a little bit, but when I come in and go to my report here and say, let's just drag something over. Let's go with revenue and manufacturer name. Yeah. Really exciting reports, I know. Notice, just like the other one, that created it in that same location, right? One thing that's a little bit interesting is when I click this create button, it knows where it's going to create it based on where I am. We did find one interesting limitation where if I was on the home screen, so not necessarily in that workspace, and I went to, actually, hold on, I think I had to go to a different workspace. Let's go to here, and I say create publish data set. I got to find my report again. Notice now that I'm actually creating this in another location. So this is going to end up being created elsewhere, which is kind of interesting. And this is almost getting ahead of ourselves in terms of the concept of shared workspaces. So just notice there was a slight difference there depending on where I started when I clicked this create button. Okay, so let me go back to my workspace. It wasn't this one, it was demo shared. Because the next thing I want to show is the save a copy feature. So either from one of these reports, now not the data set, I could say I want to save a copy. And if I save it in the same location, now I have another report right there, and I could go in and actually edit this report. So I wanted to come in and make some changes. I could go into edit mode and do what I need to do, and then hit save. So that's kind of another way to create a report if you had a base report to start from. And then the last way to create a report, and we haven't even gotten into the shared data sets yet, so bear with me, is from Power BI Desktop. And this is probably one of the more common scenarios. People are very comfortable using Power BI Desktop, and I know Microsoft is shifting towards a scenario where you could use the Power BI service almost exclusively. But there's still some capabilities in Power BI Desktop that you're going to want to leverage. So I'll show this one as well. So this concept of clicking Power BI dataset here as a source, it's also under here, Power BI dataset. This is going to give you that very same experience. I could find my demo workspace and that same report, which was this one, and say create. And you have a couple options at this point after you create your report. Percent growth by product, say. I can save this as a PBIX and upload it to the Power BI service, or people are probably familiar. I have the ability to publish. Shoot, I have to save the change first. Let me do that. Now, when you used to connect to a classic workspace data set using this mechanism, you didn't have this choice of publishing it somewhere else. So for now, I am going to publish it to the location that I connected to, and we'll see that show up there. But just realize this is also kind of a little foreshadowing the concept of shared data sets. So if I go back to the Power BI service here, there's my simple report. So in a matter of minutes, 4 different ways to create a report. Any questions about creating reports? Just kind of went through those pretty quickly. Okay. All right, so moving on, just to show now we have another report, and you could have multiple dashboards and whatnot too. But now we're going to move into the concept of shared data sets. And shared data sets, there's a number of benefits that Casey talked about. Specifically, some of them include not hitting the same database for every single report that you need with its own copy of a data set. You don't have to maintain multiple versions of the same code. So if you need to make a change, now you don't have to go and change it in 20 different locations. There's some benefits around security and kind of isolating that the data sets to different roles, and we'll cover a number of those kind of implicitly throughout the conversation. But let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. So as Casey mentioned, breaking these out into two different workspaces. One, you have the shared workspace, and then the end user workspace. Now, I named these kind of generically. Obviously, Casey went into a little bit more detail, the scenarios where you might have something that's a subject area specific workspace, and we'll see a couple of those, or something that's meant for self-service. But in both cases, it applies. So let me talk a little bit about the slight differences for creating things via a shared workspace. Let me go ahead and kind of return to this location. And I'm going to split this screen kind of quickly here so you can see both experiences. So I have a different user in this is my Power BI dev user in this dependent workspace, and I'm kind of operating on some data sets in this shared workspace. Now, you'll see a number of reports in here that we just created as we were playing around, but as discussed, we probably would not have reports in this shared workspace. We would have them more exclusively on the dependent one. Okay, so we had mentioned the option to do this via the create option. So let me go ahead and hit create here, and I'll find that same one. Oh, I made a mistake already. I have to do that from the workspace I want to save it in. So I could do it on over here where I'm actually already in that dependent workspace. And it was, aha. Okay, so let's see. I only have the option when I do this in this workspace if there is already a shared workspace in this location. So you see here, my options when I clicked create are limited. So if I limit these to demo, I don't see everything available in that other workspace. So let me go ahead and just switch workspaces using this user. Where is it called? Dependent. Okay, so now I'm on the left side in this dependent workspace, and when I say create here, this user on the left has full permissions. The user on the right is only a viewer with only build permissions in certain cases, which we'll cover in a minute. So, so if I find that report I wanted to create, so I pick that, and there's a create button really over here. That's nice. And I'm not going to go through the process of creating the report, but I'm just going to go ahead and save it. And on this screen, let me go back to this view so you can kind of see it show up. This was the via create. And you saw that appear right over there. So as I created it, that report appeared. So that was one option. But notice I had to be in that workspace in order for that one to work. So that one's a little bit confusing, clearly, since I just stumbled over it myself. Another option is to use the save a copy feature. So we saw this a second ago. Say I have this simple report I created, and I actually, maybe I published this to the wrong location. It really should have been in this workspace, or something like that may have happened. So I can here say save a copy, and notice this modal asks me where I want to save it to, and I could go in and pick that, the dependent workspace and hit OK. And that one should show up there in a moment. And refresh just because it might be a little slow. Yes, and here it is. And then I could go in here and edit. I could go in here and edit this report. So that's a second way to do it. Now, interestingly, you have to do that one from this menu, save a copy. I can't go into the actual report and say save a copy. If I do, it just gives me the option to say the name that I want to copy it as, I don't get the option to pick which workspace. So that copy can only be a copy in the same workspace. So I know it's a very subtle difference, but just kind of knowing some of those little shortcuts or differences sometimes are valuable. And then the last version, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but let me just go back to Power BI Desktop. And remember before when I published, I had the option to publish to any workspace. I picked this one, but I could instead publish to that dependent workspace. Oh, well, I already have one. That happened to be the one I just put there with the same name. So let me save this as a different name. Pick the wrong one to copy. And dependent. And then when I return here, I should see that one pop up. Yes, there it is. Okay, so those are some different ways to create shared data sets. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see the very subtle difference. This is the shared workspace, or sorry, this is the dependent workspace. And it has all these reports here that are based on this dyad final report. Notice you don't see the sources to the left, but you do see this little link icon here. Contrast that to the other scenario where I have reports with a dyad final report and all the way back to the sources. Also notice this little person appeared on this data set letting me know that there are other reports in other workspaces that are dependent on it. So just a little indication that might let me know that I might want to look a little bit deeper into what those are before I make a change. Because when you start dealing with shared data sets, you have to be mindful that any change I make to this is not only affecting these reports, but it's also affecting, notice when I click on this show impact across workspaces, I could see the impacts in this other workspace as well. So great for impact analysis before you make a change. I could actually go here, and because I'm an admin of that other workspace, not only can I see these reports, I can actually link back to that other workspace as well. So you kind of get that bi-directional lineage and impact analysis, which is pretty powerful. Any questions about this? All right. All right, so moving on. Oh, I guess one other thing to mention here. I don't have options on this data set to build a report. I would have to go back to this data set and create one using one of the mechanisms shown. So just be aware there's some differences when you're looking at those. From here, I could get to all these different settings, and we'll touch on some of those shortly. From here, I really have, a second, really have no options at all on this data set. So it's really just there to provide that linkage to that other data set. And that's a great name, external data set. Why don't they call them external data sets everywhere else? Because shared data sets is so ambiguous. I think I'm going to start using that from now on. Okay, back to the presentation then. So we saw the concept of shared data sets. You kind of have this implicit link between the two. And then KC had talked about, well, how are you then kind of separating these into different workspaces based on subject area or something along those lines? You could do it based on department. For those that know anything about the behavior of apps, you really want to get down to the level that you're going to be creating an app against, because you can only have one publish app per workspace. But the problem is, even if you broke it down based on department and everybody in sales can see all the data in sales and everybody in finance can see all the data in finance, you're inevitably going to run into a situation where some of the data in one workspace is needed in one of the other environments. And that's, yeah, so a scenario like this, where maybe the salespeople need to see the budgets that finance has provided from them for them. This concept of having security at a workspace level here is no longer enough, right? Because you may not want salespeople to see everything in finance. So one way to work around that is by giving permissions at a data set specific level. So we'll talk about this in a brief moment, but there's option to give access at a workspace level. And then a workspace may have several data sets, and you can give access at an individual data set level as well. So the challenge in this mode is now we're kind of mixing and matching workspace and data set level permissions. It could get a little bit unwieldy. One other option that Casey alluded to is having one enterprise workspace with all the data sets that, through proper, segregation of duties, somebody manages, and then only give permission at the data set level. It's a little bit more overhead, but there's some, consistency there that has another benefit. So we'll talk a little bit about security next, but before I jump into that, as exciting as it is, any other questions about workspace best practices, shared data sets, or anything that we've covered so far? Okay. All right, so data security. This is going to be a fun one, and I really don't mean that, but I mean, as much as I enjoy it, I hope you do too. It's a little bit of a dry topic, but it's really important, especially when you start layering these different types of security on top of each other. All right, so everybody's probably seen this diagram at some point out in the Microsoft documentation. And I mean, as kind of great as this looks, it is nowhere near the complete picture that you need to understand. They got these little footnotes here that come with paragraphs of kind of exception cases and all kinds of other information that you really need to understand. So just to very quickly go through this at a high level, I tried to break it down into some of the more important aspects. So from a workspace perspective, you have people in these different roles: admin, member, contributor, viewer, and their permissions cascade. Viewer having very limited capabilities. Admins obviously can do just about everything. But the problem is this documentation wasn't right. This was a mistake. Contributors cannot manage dataset permissions. I saw this. We had to do a little investigation, and turns out that that's not correct, which we'll talk about a little bit more in another minute. So ignore that one. There's also a few scenarios where things are configurable, not always at the workspace level, but an admin can allow a contributor to update the app, not control the permissions, because that one is here. But this is an option that's allowable. The other thing is, notice this one. This is kind of relevant from what we just discussed. Create a report in another workspace based on a data set in this workspace. So you can allow a viewer that permission, even though they normally don't. And we'll see how this is specifically achieved. But this is what allows that shared that shared data set scenario. And it's very important because if you give somebody contributor or higher access, then they could publish reports to that shared workspace or that enterprise dataset workspace, which you don't want them to do. And there's other security implications as well. The next thing that I want to mention, and this is, I think, very important, when the concept of sharing, one thing that you could do in reports, and let me just show you real quick so you know how it's done in the Power BI service. So if I come to the Power BI service and I pick one of these reports, I have full permissions in this environment because I'm an admin. I could come in here and say I want to share this report with somebody else, and depending on where I'm sharing this from, these could be people inside my organization, these could be people outside my organization, and they would get access to the report and the ability to build their own reports based on the underlying data set, based on this little series of checkboxes down here. Allow recipients to share your report, allow recipients to build new content using the underlying data. These two are a little bit dangerous, but ironically, this one, allow recipients to share your report, even more so, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so when I share a report with somebody else, they automatically get the ability to, let me just turn to the next one. They automatically, when I share a report with somebody else, this is somewhat dangerous, they automatically get the ability to reshare that report with other people. So now I've effectively lost control of who I'm sharing with, because this chain could go on, and you could go back and see who shared with whom and revoke access, but it could get out of control pretty quickly. So I highly suggest avoiding this scenario by one, not allowing people to reshare, and two, by educating people that all these other little scenarios that I've identified here allow the possibility of sharing. So as an example, what I just did, I was an admin. I shared with potentially a contributor who then maybe reshared with someone outside the organization. And there's certain other things like pro licenses that prevent this kind of mass kind of proliferation, but it is still something to be checked. So just kind of keep that in mind. That those check boxes, anytime you're sharing, publishing, you want to make sure you understand what the implications are there on the reshare side. Any questions on that? I know it's a lot. Okay. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, all these settings that I've kind of grayed out here, these ones don't directly affect the sharing of a data set. So when you're specifically worried about how your data is being shared, these other ones, those ones have less of an impact. Okay, so I'm going to go on, and just because I have to pat myself on the back a little bit here, that issue we noticed with the error in the documentation, I sent an email the other day, and we got confirmed that it is correct. Contributors cannot manage data set permissions, so they removed the checkbox. So I have to go back and fix my slide. But I will say it was very impressive. This was a 1.5 day turnaround. So kudos to Microsoft for getting that done. All right, so back to the concept of shared data sets and these permissions. I'm going to show this in a moment, but I want people to kind of understand some of the rationale. And part of it depends on the roles, right? So when you're building, your goal is to build a report ultimately for end users. What do you start with? Well, hopefully requirements, but building the data model, right? So the data modeler is going to collect data from some source system, and they want to publish that data set to our shared workspace. So they need permission in this shared workspace, most likely the contributor role, though they could be an admin or a member as well. That lets them put the data set out there. The next thing that we need to consider is the report author. So the report author, they need to read this data that the data modeler put out. So that could be by giving them permission on a data set directly. And they need not only read, but build so that they can build a report based on the data that they're reading. Or they need to be a viewer of this whole workspace and have build permission granted explicitly. Yes, they could, as I mentioned before, be an admin, a member, or a contributor, but that one lets them publish things to this workspace, which you don't want. And there's another implication with row-level security that we'll see in a minute. So now that the author has the ability to read the data and build a report, they also need the ability to publish a report to the end user workspace. So most likely we'd give them contributor role in this location as well. So then they publish the report and that linked data set. Finally, the report consumer. They also need to be able to read data from this source shared workspace. We recommend giving them read access at least. And if you want them to do things like analyze in Excel, then they also need build access because they're kind of building a report of their own using the analyze in Excel feature. And they need viewer role in this end workspace, or if you're publishing an app, then they would need access to the app. So a couple different options, but those are the ones that we wanted to talk through. Now, roles, permissions, what are all these things that you're talking about, right? Is what everybody's probably wondering. So let me show you, and this hopefully kind of catalyzes that. So you, and I need to be in the right user. So you can actually see. All right, so now I'm in this workspace, and the workspace has access settings. You see here, I am an admin. Our entire DWBI team is a member, and worth mentioning, granting access to security groups, much better practice than granting access to individual people. We have a Power BI account that we use for random things that's a contributor, and we have a Power BI dev account that is a viewer. So I can type in somebody here like Philcox, Casey, and I could add him as one of these roles. I could also come in and change a role or remove a role entirely. So that's how you manage access at a workspace level. Then there's the concept of access at a data set level. So our dyad final report, if I click on this, and remember I have to be an admin or a member to manage permissions, I have this manage permission option. And it brings me to this other screen where I could see not only that, yes, Jared's an admin, DWBI is a member, but I can either assign or revoke additional capabilities. So I could add build. So now Power BI Dev is a viewer with build permissions. I could add reshare, but as we just discussed, I very rarely add reshare because that creates that perpetual kind of security concern. And I don't want to bash sharing. It could be very valuable and very effective. There just needs to be a little bit of education and some guardrails that prevents it from kind of proliferating. Those two combinations, the workspace and these permissions, are what allow you to kind of control all those security. Notice myself, or the DWBI team, I don't have an option to change everything because they have, remember, build and reshare already. Contributors, I could add reshare. Contributors have build built in. Okay, any questions about those? All right, let me just very quickly talk about row-level security and why I don't like giving people contributor access as opposed to viewers with build. Viewer with build is a little bit different than contributor. One, those viewers can't publish to this workspace, which a contributor can. And then the other thing is viewers. Notice this report here says dyad final with RLS. Viewers can't bypass row level security. Admins, members, and contributors can, in this workspace, can all, and actually I say can, they all automatically bypass row level security. So you want to be very careful whenever you're using row level security that you're not giving people in that same workspace contributor access or greater against that data set. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. I'm an admin, so maybe that's not the best case, but let me go ahead and switch over to my other test account who we just saw as a viewer right here. And they're going to go to the shared workspace survey. Notice they don't even see the data sets here, so there's no way for them to bypass the security. And I'm just going to go to this Zenith Apparel row level security one. I forget what I had set this individual up for, but you could see, one, they only see the West Coast, and they see revenue and cost data. If I go back to here and I give make Power BI Dev a contributor instead, close, go back here, and hopefully just refreshing this does the trick. Takes a half of a second. So now, even though the row level security says that they are only supposed to see the Pacific, they see all the data. So very important to kind of realize that implication. So how do we resolve that? Well, one, we only make them a viewer in this environment, but when we have our report in a another environment, notice, let me go to, well, I think I could just do it from here. Let me save a copy to my, oh, no, that was, no, that one, Zenith Apparel. Yes, let me save a copy of this to the dependent workspace like we saw before. And before I go there, I'm going to turn them back to a viewer. So now they're just a viewer. And when I go to the dependent workspace and I bring up that report, which is right here, and I just messed something up. Oh, okay. It just took a second. Now I only see the Pacific data, but now in this workspace where I am as the Power BI Dev account, Power BI Dev, my permissions in this environment are admin. So I'm in the dependent workspace. I'm an admin here, but since I'm only a viewer in the other workspace, row level security is still honored. I know that's a lot. Hopefully, people understand kind of the implications there, and you can come back, look at the recording, ask me a question if you have it, but just want to make sure that people know that implication of row level security. Okay. All right, so moving on, we kind of went through those. Any other questions about workspace roles via the access control, the manage permissions to control build and reshare or row level security? Okay. Actually, let me show one other thing that I forgot to mention when we were in manage permissions. So in manage permissions, not only for these people can I, add or remove build like I had done before, I could add a new user directly. I could add somebody in here, and we'll go with KC again. I know I didn't save that before, but let's add KC, and I'm going to uncheck this checkbox. He could build, that's fine. He shows up as not a viewer, but he has read access and build. So this is one of the scenarios where you might give the end user access to just one data set as opposed to viewer, which has access to all the data sets in this workspace. Okay, so subtle difference there. Viewer has access to all the data sets in the workspace. Read is assigned on a data set by data set basis. And one other thing to throw out there is app. When you publish an app, it automatically gives them read access as well. But so app and read are very similar. App just means they have access to look at a published app. Okay. Back to the presentation. All right, so deployment complexities. When you're using shared data sets, I know this is a lot of text, it's only 4 main bullets, things that you need to be aware of. When you're building a report on top of a data set in a different workspace, they have to, as Casey said, be both in the new workspace experience, right? Both the shared and the end user. I did find one random workaround. If you have data sets in the classic workspace, the save a copy feature in the workspace view, not on the report itself, does actually allow it to work. I wouldn't recommend using it because that may just go away since it's contrary to the documentation. By design, publish to web, like i.e. anonymous, embedding is not supported for shared reports based on shared data sets. Publish to web, for those that don't know, is when you take a report and you want to embed it on your public-facing website and anybody could see it, regardless of who they are. If they find the URL, they could see it. Very few cases do we suggest using this. Certainly not with any kind of corporate data. Maybe like public health agencies do it with like COVID data, or nonprofits do it with donor donation type metrics. But we recommend locking that down. Eversource, I'm sure, does something like that with outage map. Although I don't think you're using Power BI there, or at least not yet. So important to understand, like I mentioned before, if I change a data set, it impacts not only the reports in that workspace, but everything that's dependent on it. So that impact analysis, should help figure out who else is using that data set before I change it. And there's kind of approaches that you could take to make sure you're, not having a negative impact on other folks. And then the last one I wanted to mention is deployment pipelines. So the official documentation says that reports that share a data set in the Power BI service can't be automatically deployed environment to environment using the Power BI REST API or the deployment pipelines. While that is true, there is a way to work around it, but it does require a little bit of kind of manual manipulation. You basically, after you do the deployment, have to, let me see if I don't have a good example here. This is a screenshot of a deployment pipelines in Power BI. And I think it was Mark had said that makes it so easy. You just say deploy to test, deploy to prod, and it pushes changes through those different workspaces. But with shared data sets, if you kind of run through this process with your reports, your end user workspace, they're all still pointing back at the dev workspace that you created them from. So there's this command called rebind with the admin APIs. I know that's kind of a lot of words that lets you kind of repoint prod at the corresponding prod workspace, test at the corresponding test workspace. It's just not built into this nifty deployment pipeline capability that's you get with Premium, and it's not built in directly to some of the kind of roll your own with the REST API deployment options. At least not yet. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of talking about shared data sets and security. Now on to the kind of conversation we've been waiting for, which is Enterprise Composite Models, also known as direct query against Power BI data sets and Azure Analysis Services tabular models. Not to be confused with composite models, which are when you're combining direct query and import. So what is all that I just said? So Power BI has a couple different connection types. Import, where you're pulling data from a database into Power BI, into the Power BI service, and then you're feeding your reports from there. Direct query, where you don't actually store the data in the Power BI service, just the structure, and then every interaction with a report sends small queries and retrieves small amounts of data to build that report all the way back to the source database. And then the last was live connection. This is when it's similar to direct query, but this is when, like, Power BI Desktop, for instance, or a shared data set connects to analysis services or a Power BI data set, and you just create a report based on that live connection. So we saw that before, and let me just remind everybody what that looks like. I'm just going to create a new report here. Today. Okay. So I already have a data set published up to the Power BI service. So when I say Power BI data set, this is the live connection scenario. Not only I'm going to pick this Zenith Apparel row of security, one that we connected to in the past. Not only am I connecting to that data model, and I get all access to all these tables, I also get access to all these calculations as well, which you don't get with a normal direct query. And then at the bottom, notice it says connected live to Power BI dataset, Zenith Apparel, RLS, and Demo Workspace. So this is a live connection. That's this model. Now, what Enterprise Composite Models do is allow all three of these at the same time. It's like crazy. So you can have, you're basically, instead of doing direct query against a database, you're now doing direct query against the live connection model. And you can augment that by then pulling data in from another source. So this is kind of game changing, because consider a scenario where you have a blessed enterprise level data set and reports, but then someone comes along and has like a tactical kind of complementary data set they want to use to enrich that experience. Before, you couldn't do that. You had to go get the PBAX from whoever created this one originally, modify that, and now you're duplicating it. Well, now you can. So to show what I mean, let's just quickly throw a report together. So I want to, let's say, we'll show revenue by region and date. Where's my calendar table? There we go. And let's just find year and throw that in here. And of course, I put these in the wrong location, like that. And let's go to the line chart. So here's my revenue in my different regions by year. This data is a little old, obviously, so we made it partway through 2017. There wasn't, a cliff in productivity at that point. We're just, partway through. So this is great, but as a kind of sales manager working with the CFO, I want to give all my sales associates for these different regions some revenue goals. I don't have my budget information in this spreadsheet, in this data set finance maybe worked with me to put together. Lo and behold, 2017, 2018, all the way up to 2025 revenue goals in this spreadsheet. In the past, there was no way for me to pull that in to this report, but now there is. So let me go ahead first and show a couple things here. We looked at the bottom and saw that this is a live connection. Notice you have this button now that says make changes to this model. You also, on the modeling tab, have a button up here to make changes to this model. And in the past, all these features up here would have been disabled. As soon as you did a live connection, you could not do any of these options. Well, now you can. And actually, there's one thing I forgot to show you. Since this is a preview setting, under File, Options, and Settings, you have to go to Preview Features and say, Enable Direct Query for Power BI Datasets and Analysis Services. So I've done that, and that's what kind of lit all these up. Well, I know I want to pull in some data from Excel. In this case, I'm going to connect to a version I have out in SharePoint. So I said web, but it gives me this prompt that says, hey, you're going to make changes. You know, this is a preview feature and yada, yada. I have that same spreadsheet that I just showed you up in a SharePoint location. So I'm just going to paste that in here. With the number 1. And this is going to give me a couple warnings. Normally, I would have to give it my credentials, which I think I already did. So it's able to connect, and here's my spreadsheet. I'm going to say transform because I need to fix it up a little bit while it loads that. Remember, we got this total row, the grand total column. We got to do a little bit of cleanup. So for those that know Power BI, this is incredibly easy to do. I'm going to say I don't want the total row. And I'm going to scroll over here and say, let's get rid of this grand total column. Remove. And instead of having all my data kind of by region, I'm going to pivot this data or unpivot this data. So I click my year column and say transform, unpivot other columns. So very simple. Now I have, for every year, I have all the regions and their values. So this is my region name. This is my revenue target. And the only other thing that am I going to do it? Yeah, I might just change this to a fixed decimal number, and I'm going to make this a whole number. And I think that's all that I needed to do. So then I'm going to say, oh, let me rename this. We'll call this targets. I'm going to say close and apply. So now what I've effectively done is taken that original model, and it's going to warn me about a security risk, and I'll explain that while it's loading. What happens is now that I've kind of supplemented that original model with this new data, when I click on fields and after I've linked these two sources together, if I click on the region field in my Excel data, it may want to filter the region data in the connection, and it might send the region name as a filter over. So it's just warning you that it may send some information over to the other source for things like filtering. But now I have a new table in here called somewhere revenue targets. Right now it's going to be isolated on its own, so I have to link it to my other tables. So I'm going to go to the modeling view, and there's a new view that is kind of nicer to look at, and you saw this briefly from Graham. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create another one, and we'll just call this sales targets, whatever. I'm not going to fix the name. And I only want to see some of the tables in there. I want to see my revenue target. I want to see my geography, my region, my sales table, and my calendar. So I'll rearrange these a little bit, throw this down here. And you saw, as Graham showed earlier, that the revenue targets table looks a little different, does not have the blue bars that indicate a direct query, but very subtle difference. So what do I need to do? I want to link my original region table to my region revenue targets table. So when I filter by region, it filters not only my sales, but my revenue target. I also have a year here that I want to associate with my calendar, but I can't link this directly to a date on my calendar table. I could link the year column to a year column I have here, but that creates a many-to-many relationship, and I prefer to avoid those whenever I can. So what I need is, my revenue target starts the first of the year, so I'm going to add another column to this table, my revenue targets table. I'm going to add a new column, and I could have done this in the query editor, but we'll call this first of year, and that is date and my year, and then January 1st. There's a couple other ways to do this, but this is a pretty simple one. So let me go back to here, and now I could link my first of year to the date column here, and I should be good to go. Okay, so let me go back to this view. Actually, there's one other thing I'm going to do, just because this new modeling experience, it makes it really convenient. I have all these tables here. This is like out of control. Nobody needs to see the web metrics, user security. They need the sales table, so I'm going to highlight these and say hide. They don't need this stuff, so I'll hide those. And they don't need channel up to calendar. Hide those. In the past, you used to have to do this one table at a time. It was incredibly slow. So this is great. This little multi-select. You could do multi-select for columns too. Like if I wanted to say all these were geography, which they're already set to, I could come in here and it's in the advanced data. Yeah, I could say that these were all city or something like that. Okay, so done here. Go back to this view. And what do I want to do? I want to see what my revenue target looks like. But I want to see by date and by region. Drag that in there. And we go line chart again. So there's my revenue targets. And they line up kind of nice. So what I've effectively done is this data is coming from Excel, well, with a little bit of data from my region and my calendar table. And this is exclusively from the old view. But I want to put these together. So what I'm going to do, since we're partway through 2017, you'll see what I want to do here. We want our revenue measure. And we want our calendar date again, our year. We want our region. Actually, we don't need the region. We'll just do it for the whole company. But we want our revenue target now, right? So revenue target. But the problem is now we're double count. Let's do stacked. Now we're double counting because we're already partway through this year. So what I want to do is maybe I'll create a column called remaining revenue to target or something like that, a measure. So I'm going to say here, new measure. Remaining revenue to target. All right, and what does this equal? So this, well, we know we're going to need the sum of our target revenue target, we called it, right? So let's save that as a variable. And what we're going to return is, oops. Well, if there is no revenue target, we want a blank. We don't care about the earlier years. So I'll say if is blank revenue target blank. Otherwise, we want the revenue target minus the revenue. And I think, so that's our measure right there. Can everybody see the, I think I could do this. So revenue target is the sum of all the revenue targets, regardless of region and whatever. And then we're going to say if the revenue target's blank, we want a blank. Otherwise, actually, we don't want blank, do we? Remaining revenue. Well, we'll see. Did I just hit escape? I don't know. There it goes. I did. Oops, wrong button. Let me do that again. Or did I not? Yeah, I did. All right, and just for the sake of time, I have this written down somewhere already. I spelled things a little differently, but. Yeah, so if revenue target is blank, blank. Okay. I called this different. This was revenue target, not target revenue. Okay, so instead of our revenue target, we're going to say revenue to reach target. We'll get rid of the other one, and now you have this nice kind of gradual increase. So now we have a measure that's combining data calculations from the original source and from our Excel document, and we can kind of see what the implications are here. Notice at the bottom now it says storage mode equals mixed, so it's still doing direct query and import. And just like anything else, I could then publish this out to the Power BI service. Let me do that, and we'll call this comp1. And we want this to go to our, well, we raise an interesting question. Which workspace does this go to? Does it go to the shared workspace because it's a data set, or does this go to the end user because I already went ahead and created a report? Well, I probably shouldn't have gone ahead and created a report. I probably should have published the data set first and then created a report against that data set. But maybe this was just my test data set for the purpose of creating the measures I needed to do. So this should go against the shared workspace, and then any reports that we create would be in the dependent workspace. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what it looks like in the Power BI service. Okay, there's our report. Now, the first time I did this, I didn't point to SharePoint. I pointed to a local file, and it would not work. Why is that? Well, if I go to find that report I just created, or here it is. So comp, notice it's pointing at a Power BI source here. When I go into the settings, it already has my credentials and it can connect to the SharePoint file. notice you get this weird warning here for the connection to the Power BI dataset. This is misleading. They actually put this warning in here that says Power BI credentials and Azure Analysis Services credentials have already been set, but you can change them. So this is one of the scenarios where you actually don't have to resolve this connection type. But when I connected to a local file instead of web, I couldn't actually get here because it was first telling me I needed to connect with a gateway to refresh. So just one odd behavior with composite models, at least right now, that you should be aware of. I think eventually this will go away and gateways will work, but you know, that kind of tripped me up for a few minutes. So just like anything else, I could save a copy of this to my other workspace, or do one of those other techniques for creating a shared data set. And when I go over to my other user in the dependent workspace, I should see a refresh here. Here's my report, and I open it. But what happened here? Why am I seeing such a disparity between my revenue data and my target data? Well, the answer is row level security. So this user can only see, remember, Pacific. So they're only seeing the Pacific data here. And even though I still linked to that same region table, one of the limitations of composite models for now is that row level security won't propagate between the direct query and the imported, in this case, scenario. So if I wanted to filter these based on that security, I would have to recreate, at least for the time being, that region table with row level security that would then propagate through and filter these down. So that's one of the limitations. So just something to be aware of. Okay, there's a couple other limitations that I was going to mention as well. Let me just bring up a document here with some of them listed. So row level security is one of the big ones. I just jotted down a couple of the most notable. It says you may also experience unexpected behavior with a date hierarchy versus a built-in date field. So just be aware that that might be the case. In this case, I just used a year column and I didn't see any odd behavior. This is a feature still in preview, so it may soon be resolved. The one that was a little bit alarming was the function all selected could return incomplete results. So that one I hope that they fix. And that's a DAX function. So if you're ever doing a calculation and you want to ignore some of the filters, right now all selected is having an issue that they're working on addressing. And then there's a couple other limitations with strange behavior when you have filters that you're applying between the remote and the imported model. So I imagine in the very near future some of those filter limitations will be resolved, but I wanted to share them as well. Okay, so that was the Enterprise Composite Model demo. Anybody have any questions, or Graham, was there anything that you were going to cover that I didn't? Did I lose Graham?
Jared, yeah, I'm not sure he's on. I know Casey had to leave a little bit early, about 20 minutes ago, but I'm thinking Graham might have left too.
Okay. Well, I mean, he does already know the material, so. But anybody have any questions? I mean, this is one of the biggest announcements in Power BI, for the last several years. So really exciting that you kind of had the option now to have a central enterprise model, and then a department specific or purpose specific model that kind of inherits from it. One of the other things I can mention is when you're building this, one of the things I was a little sad about is I couldn't add like append to the sales table with more sales data. I was hoping I could do something like that. I could probably do it with DAX, but I couldn't do it in the query editor. I couldn't join two tables together. And the reason being, when you go to the query editor, they don't even show up here. So only my new table shows up in the query editor. So you are limited by what you can manipulate in that regard. You saw I hid some tables. So when I'm in this view now, I only have, if I collapse all these, I only have a couple tables as opposed to all the others, but I can still see the hidden ones. So there isn't really a great way for me to remove tables either. I would love to come in here and say, I don't even need, not this one over here. I don't even need half these tables and say, delete them. But as of last time I looked, there wasn't an option to like selectively remove them either. No. All right. Well, I think that's everything that I have. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to bring them up. If not, and something comes up, feel free to reach out. I don't see Mark out there. I was going to cover his data. Was it Mark that had the data flow question? The original data flow question.
It might have been Sid.
No, Sid, I think Sid,
one
your
that
question,
was a little bit tricky.
Sid's question was more on the the volume of data, right? Yeah, Mark's question was on premium, I think.
Mark did have to leave a little bit early, but everyone will receive a follow-up email tomorrow morning that contains the recording and then links to Jared, Graham, and Casey, so we can all connect on there. And then, of course, you guys can email us if you have any questions.
All right. All right. Anybody, any other questions, topics? I know we do usually wrap up with, kind of a repeat, call to action as far as always looking for people to present. You're happy to work through some scenarios. If we know them in advance, we can use this as working session. So happy to do that as well. I think the next meeting, we're going to reschedule the topic that we had originally from today and cover that. And, Gina, I'm sure everybody who's part of this meeting will get that updated invite and, for a couple months out. And otherwise, I think we're good, right?
Yeah, we are all set. We want to thank everybody for coming, and we will hope.
Thank you. That was a great presentation.